I will start record also, just so that we have that as well. And thank you for joining, everybody. This is an exciting moment that we are at where we are just about ready to actually start doing stuff. And I know it's been a really hard conversation figuring out, there was the 2 years worth of figuring out what we wanted to do and then getting down to the specifics and then, massaging the numbers. And I think we're really close to a thing that we can move forward with. Of course, the next big landmark will be on January 25th when the policy committee meets. So we need to leave tonight with something that we can bring them for them to recommend for approval by their local boards. So perhaps we can just do a very quick round of intro since there are some new people in the group who haven't been involved in this process for the entire 2 years. And Jay, I'll let you introduce yourself first, and then you can ask your question at the same time.
Howdy, folks. I'm Jay Riggs, District Manager of the Washington Conservation District.
Did you want to ask your question right now too?
Yeah, I was actually wanting to just prompt clarifying how we're going to make a decision today. Is this a consensus-based process or mob rule, majority-based? I would vote for consensus-based using the Ron Harnack technique of if you don't agree that you would need to raise your hand and explain why. But I'm a fan of consensus.
Okay. Well, perhaps as you introduce yourself, if you feel differently, if you feel strongly about a different way we should approach this conversation, you can say so. I think I know everybody here, but Angie Hong, I coordinate East Metro Water Resource Education Program and have been doing the policy committee coordination and stakeholder engagement for this process. So Emily, I see you next on my screen.
Emily Hines, Comfort Lake Forest Lake Watershed District, and I am on the planning team as well for Lower St. Croix. And no disagreement with Jay's suggestion.
All right, then I see Mike Eisensee.
Hi, I'm Mike with Carnelia Marine St. Croix Watershed District, also kind of on the planning team. And I think consensus based is the way we move forward with the steering committee in the past, and it seems to make sense to continue that.
Okay, Jen Kozerski, do you want to go next? And did I butcher your last name?
It was close, so points for that. Jen Kostrowski, Metropolitan Council, the Water Resources Group. And I agree, consensus sounds good.
Okay, how about Tiffany?
Tiffany Betterman with Isanti Soil and Water, also on the planning team, and sure, consensus sounds great.
All right. Next, we've got Susanna.
Hi, Susanna Wilson-Witkowski, Water Resource Manager with Chisago County, and consensus all the way.
Okay, Karen.
Karen Kill with Browns Creek Watershed District, and it sounds fine.
Okay, John Freitag.
Hi everyone, John Freitag with the Minnesota Department of Health. I'm leaning forward because on Zoom I've been told people can't hear me very good if I don't do this. So.
Okay, I heard you just fine, so it worked.
Whatever you did worked.
You're muted, Jay.
I think Jay just wanted to do this.
Jamie.
Good.
Yeah, Jamie Sherbon with the Anoka Conservation District in Sunrise River WMO. On the planning team, and yep, go with consensus.
All right, Jerry.
Jerry Spetzman, Chisago Lakes Lake Improvement District. Consensus sounds good to me.
It's very cool because your voice and your image are not syncing on my end, so it's like your voice is coming from a different place than you are.
I'm calling in on my phone and I'm using my computer for the video, and I'm having issues here.
So you're the 612 number down here then?
I think so.
612-398, that number?
Yep.
Okay, good. Then that answers my question as to who that is. Okay, Caleb, do you want to go next?
Hi, this is Caleb Anderson with Pine County Planning and Zoning Department. I am on my telephone audio as well, so I missed the question about consensus.
The question is, do you want to use consensus as the decision-making thing? Or do you want to adopt a different decision-making procedure? Okay. Oh, let's see, Matt Moore.
I'm Matt Moore, Administrator of South Washington Watershed District.
Okay, and then we've got John Hanson.
John Hanson with Valley Branch Watershed District. I'm fine with the consensus.
Okay. And welcome to the group, John. Okay, Craig Mill.
Craig Mel, Chisago Sound Water, and I vote for dictatorship and that Matt Moore should be in charge. No, consensus works for me.
Okay.
It's too late. It's too late, Craig. I already am in charge.
Yeah, I was like, what's the reality here? Who's pulling all the strings in the background?
Okay, let's see, Maureen.
Hi, Maureen Hoffman, Public Health and Environment with Washington County, and I love consensus.
Okay. And let's see, who else have I got? Eric from MPCA.
This is Eric Collins. I'm part of the TAC, but also from the MPCA Watershed Division. I'm gonna have to dip out a bit early because the Snake River is actually going through their One Watershed, One Plan meeting in about 30 minutes. So I'm here just to see if there's any updates.
All right, I see Derek next.
Derek Wadachek, Ixtenia County Planning and Zoning. Just here to receive updates and consensus vote works best for me as well.
Okay, did I miss anybody? I do not think I see an arrow indicating any other.
But Dan
screens.
Fabian?
Oh, Dan Fabian. Dan Fabian, how could I forget you? Do you want to introduce yourself, Dan?
Sure, I was hoping I wouldn't have to talk. So Dan Fabian, Board Conservationist, Board of Water and Soil Resources. And I think we're actually the advisory committee, right? When you have the state agencies on top of the steering?
Yes, that is
okay.
correct.
And I was having some audio problems. When I muted my microphone, they seemed to improve a little bit. So you were, Angie, you were breaking up some, but.
I was, okay, sorry.
But if I muted, it seems better. So maybe it's my end.
I know that sometimes I have internet connectivity problems, but it doesn't seem to be a problem right now. So Dan, is it just you? Barb is not participating in the meeting today?
Right. Barb is up helping out family issues and that. I think she's back on Wednesday or Thursday of next week.
Okay, that's fine. I just wanted to know if we should expect her to be joining. Okay, wonderful. Well, let us, I guess, open up the spreadsheet. I already do have it open, but let me share my screen so that we can look at the place that we are at right now. Okay, I just have to slide my little video screen view of all you around so that you're not blocking the spreadsheet here. Okay, so when we last met as a steering committee, that was either the end of November or the beginning of December. I cannot quite remember the date, but we had put rough numbers for the amount of funding that we wanted for these different categories that had already previously been identified as priorities for the watershed-based implementation funding. And then when we talked again later in December, we determined that we should divide into subcommittees to look at each of these activities in more detail, talk about exactly what would happen in that activity, what the priority areas would be, try to assign milestones and measurable inputs if possible, and then determine if this, let me go over here, if this number was indeed accurate. And so I sent you all on Tuesday afternoon a link to this updated table. It's just a copy of the previous table, but with the new numbers and a little bit more information added into it. And also some of the raw notes from the subcommittee meeting. And unless anybody has a different preference, I can just kind of quickly verbally walk through what each of these categories is, and then maybe we can check in as a group if this feels like a good start. There was a couple of specific questions we do need to discuss. So does that sound like a good plan, that I just start by walking through what's in this table right now? All right. Hearing no dissent, I will continue then. So the first category would be developing a basin-wide agricultural outreach program. And the key components of this would be hiring an agronomy outreach specialist. Right now, $250,000 has been recommended for this category. And this would allow for one full-time agronomy outreach specialist who would work basin-wide in combination with the staff that are already at the soil and water conservation districts. And Mary Jo Youngbauer's conservation planning position is currently funded for 2021, but this would put $50,000 towards partially supporting the continuation of her position in 2022. And I'll kind of skip over the priority areas, milestones, measurable outputs, because that shows up in this next category right here, which is the agricultural best management practices. The agricultural best management practices, we are going to divide into two different categories, or are recommending to divide into two different categories. So one would be for structural practices, $175,000 for structural practices. And then the other would be for non-structural practices, so soil health initiatives, cover crops, reduced tillage, things like that. But the priority areas for both of these kinds of practices would be roughly the same. So we're looking at areas draining to Rock Lake, Rock Creek, Sunrise River, the St. Croix River tributaries with direct discharge to the St. Croix River, and then second tier down, lakes that drain to the St. Croix River. So projects may also occur at other priority waters that are already identified as priorities in the plan. Looking at potentially getting 20 best management practices that are structural and 300 pounds of total phosphorus. And then in terms of non-structural practices, hoping to get perhaps 2,000 acres and 400 pounds of total phosphorus. And I'll pause because I saw something light up in the chat. So where did that chat window go? It vanished on me.
Hey, Angie, I can keep track of those chats for you. Derek was asking, so structural meaning actual construction projects, clean water projects. And so the answer to that question, Derek, yeah, the difference between non-structural and structural is those are both implementation practices, but non-structural is more like soil health initiative, cover crops, and those sorts of things. And structural practices would be more of our traditional agriculture.
Yeah, let me see if I can highlight it. Okay, so in terms of
Derek, does that answer your
structural,
question? Thank you.
yeah, in terms of structural, it's just like Jay said, you know, this would be a physical thing that gets built, whereas the non-structural could be more like a farmer who decides to start using cover crops or converts from an annual to a perennial.
Emily just shared a link to the E-Link guidance categories. So if you want to have more detail on what that specifically means, that's the link to go to. Thank you, Emily.
Okay, so in terms of this first category, the agronomy outreach specialist, where they would be doing their work, they will be working basin-wide, but they will have a focus on these priority areas because that is where we especially want the practices to be accomplished. Okay, so then another big topic of conversation was
Just
around.
excuse me, Angie,
Yes.
can I ask a question on
Yes.
that? So on the measurable outputs now, that's for basically the life of this grant agreement, right? We're only talking about watershed-based implementation funding, right?
I believe so. Would somebody else from the ag group jump in? But I
I
believe
can take
so.
that one, Angie. This is Craig. Yes,
Yeah.
Dan, I ran those numbers based off Bowser pollution reduction numbers, based off estimated costs. So yes, those were first start of numbers for this biennium budget.
Okay, all right, super, thanks.
Okay, so the next category is shared services educator. And we are looking at putting $125,000 toward this activity. And this is a little bit different than the previous number for a couple of reasons. One is that when we get down to this part about view corridor standards, we, the subcommittee that talked about that decided to zero out that line item and put the money up in the education program, because the kinds of work that would be happening for view corridor standards is very much like the education and outreach to local communities that will be happening for MIDS adoption. And it's more of an education activity than a, you know, it's not a structural practice kind of activity. So that money got moved up here. And
So
this,
let me ask a question on that too
yeah.
then, Angie.
Mhm.
Is there, what's the water quality tie or is going to happen with that? I would flag that as I'm not sure that's going to be eligible, the view corridors. Maybe in the education program where you've moved it, I'd have to ask some more questions on that, but
Think of it,
there
hey,
needs,
Dan, think of it in terms of
Yep.
buffers.
What? Sorry, Jay, could you say that again?
Think of view corridors in terms of buffers, because it really is about promoting standards that would support buffers and setbacks and those sorts of things.
I would suggest that you adjust your activity description then.
I can view corridor standards. I'm just going to make a note right here and massage the language so it specifically says buffers, because I think that Jay's right. What we're talking about is riparian landscapes and ensuring both the trees are kept in place if the trees exist, you know, and that natural buffers are used wherever possible.
Yeah, and this is Mike Eisenstein. I was on the group that looked at this, and I think the strategy that we're looking at is that the first 2 years is really the education with community staff and some introductions to what MIDS and what these shoreland practices are, and then in the next biennium, in year 3 and 4, would be the opportunity for communities to basically apply or submit interest in working on ordinances. So it's the first step to get to ordinance or local control updates in order to protect these shoreland areas or adopt MIDS.
Thank you, Mike. I want to add that Derek in the chat said this was his input way back when, and it has a direct link to runoff infiltration and buffer protection. So really the goal of this was riparian buffer protection.
Mm-hmm. And I picture, since this is mostly an education activity, I would picture these things just going hand in hand, talking to the council about this is one comprehensive set of approaches that they're adopting, not coming to them once to talk about MIDS and a second time to talk about view corridors, that it's just kind of like, we're asking you to look at this, you know, comprehensive approach to updating your ordinances to protect water resources.
Yeah, it's more of a menu of the different types of activities a community could implement to protect water resources.
If you guys bring view corridors, up to Pine County, is that going to fly? The terminology. I understand you're talking about preserving existence, so you might want to say what it is. I don't know, it's just a thought.
Thanks, Dan. This is not necessarily how the education and outreach program is going to phrase things.
All right. So in terms of funding, this would allow funding for us to have one new full-time education staff person that would work basin-wide. Our plan is to combine funds from the existing MREP program with the Lower St. Croix One Watershed, One Plan funds, so that it could be a full-time education position instead of a half-time position. And also some funding for Emily Johnson, who is currently coordinating a similar shared education program from Anoka SWCD. She has room in her work plan that she can also provide education support within the Lower St. Croix Basin. And we talked with Anoka SWCD, and they're happy to have her working across county lines and not just working in Anoka County. All right. So then going down to urban BMPs, looking at providing cost share for implementation of structural urban best management practices, $225,000. And the priority areas would be St. Croix River direct drainage, Sunrise River watershed, Fish Lake, Big Carnelian, Big Marine, Forest Lake. And projects may also occur at other priority waters identified already in the Lower St. Croix Comprehensive Watershed Management Plan, looking at in the neighborhood of 20 BMPs and 200 pounds of total phosphorus. And this is one place for additional conversation, because we talked a lot about non-structural practices and street sweeping in particular, and just where the appropriate category would be to have funding for working with communities to create a street sweeping program. All right, carry on. Wetland restoration.
How is that prioritized and targeted, the selection of those projects?
The actual projects themselves will be reviewed based on that criteria that was already identified in, can't remember the name of the table, but we do have a table for actual projects to be reviewed under. And this is just looking at the priority areas where they'd happen. We do also, where is the street sweeping currently listed? We did actually have a priority. Oh, okay. We currently have it under targeting analysis. So we do actually have identified target communities where we would like to have street sweeping implemented as a phosphorus reduction strategy.
Yeah, and to clarify, this is my guys. So just to clarify on that one a little bit more. The first step of that process is actually doing the street sweeping analysis to prioritize locations and frequency, and that's why it's under the targeting area. And then then work with the communities, and if there are communities that would be interested or able to increase frequency and targeted sweeping, then that goes into the cost share program.
And our conversation was such that we would focus on, the street sweeping analyses in year one and potentially be able to begin implementing programs in year 2 or year 3 if we're not able to get it completed quickly enough.
Okay, guys, we had another comment from Derek. He's just rocking the chat. So he said most public work departments already do street sweeping. I would foresee this money going more toward infiltration, curb cut, rain garden support that have multiple purpose benefits. And I would agree with what Derek says. And at the same time, there are going to be some catchments and treatment areas where we identify enhanced street sweeping as a very cost-effective BMP. And that's where it's included as an option for implementation.
Yeah, and the example that we're really looking towards is City of Forest Lake, which they do have some rain gardens, and they did have an existing street sweeping program, but worked with Comfort Lake, Forest Lake Watershed District to do a targeted or develop a targeted street sweeping program. And so they're sweeping much more frequently than previously on specific streets where there was a large amount of sediment accumulating or a large amount of leaf fall. And we're able to measure and demonstrate, a much higher phosphorus reduction as a result.
Yep, thank you. Emily just posted a link to their sweeping results study from 2019. So thank you, Emily. I also want to note too that in a lot of these municipal areas that are adjacent to the St. Croix, where there are lots of situations where there's direct discharge, untreated discharge from impervious areas to water bodies, where there's a lot of cases where the street sweeping can be very effective. If you can intercept that and provide those multiple benefits, that's great. But in a lot of cases, that's very expensive. And so all this is going to be looked at with that, how do we get the biggest bang for the buck?
Okay, so scrolling back up to where I had been, urban BMPs. Then wetland restorations. There are tables and figures that this was like a little bit too much to just copy and paste into this thing. So I had just put a little note here that said, see the attached Word doc, because there was a nice table created in the Word document that the Wetlands Subcommittee created. But in terms of priority areas, looking at Sunrise River, direct drainage to St. Croix and Rock Creek, or a location where it would have a demonstrable water quality benefit to one of the priority lakes from table 5.3. And this is a fairly small line item. There's already a couple of potential projects identified that would pretty much gobble that up right away if they were a project that we moved forward with.
And this topic brings up the issue of watershed-based funding isn't allowed to be used for monitoring, diagnostic monitoring. And so that's something where, especially for determining where to implement wetland restoration practices, that's something we're going to need to figure out, because that type of monitoring is critical for us to be able to prioritize where we do a lot of these wetland restoration practices.
Okay, we already discussed view corridor standards, which the subcommittee recommended to move the funding for this up into the education category. And here is where there is actual language in here that talks a little bit more about, we're talking about 25% of lot width to a maximum of 35 feet width, and vegetation clearing standards to protect buffers, native ecosystems, habitat corridors. So it's very much focused on buffers and riparian areas. Internal analyses. The group is recommending $50,000 in order to conduct internal loading of phosphorus analyses on 2 lakes during this first round of funding. They think that there are 15 lakes total that would cost about $25,000 each. And so looking at being able to accomplish 2 during this first round. And in terms of priority A lakes, we're looking at Linwood and Martin Lake and Anoka as potentials, Goose Lake in Washington County, priority A lakes with Rush and Goose as our preferred top 3. Okay, and then we've got Walmart, Pioneer, North Goose Lakes, and Chisago are all priority A's. So there's a number of lakes. There was let's see, there was the group project evaluation process identified in the plan. So there was a project evaluation process for how the 2 winning lakes would get chosen.
Angie, we have a chat comment from John Hansen.
Yes.
stating that when we list a lake name, that we should make sure we're clear about which county that's in. Because
Yeah.
if it's called Mud or Brown or Square or Round or Goose, there's probably one in every county.
Well, and if it's called Long, then you have 3 in Washington County alone. So yeah, that's a good point, that it can get pretty confusing.
Yep, John actually said there are several goose lakes in Washington County, so.
Okay, next category is targeting analyses. So conducting analyses to identify and prioritize water quality improvement projects. And all requested water bodies are listed in tables 5.2 and 5.3 as regionally significant lakes, rivers, and streams. There are some numbers assigned in terms of estimated cost for targeted analyses to be conducted for Linwood Lake in Anoka County, St. Croix Direct in Washington County. You know what would be for this particular one? I was just going to stop and pull up that little map, because that is probably easier for people to visualize than me verbally listing off what all of these are.
Hey, so I have a question. Didn't the Lake St. Croix Direct, hasn't that already been done? So is this an update of that?
Mike or somebody else, you want to speak to that?
Sorry, it took me a second to unmute. Yeah, so this is the Lake St. Croix Direct is done to the south side of Stillwater. So in the graphic, you can see it's just at the very bottom of the photo, a little bit of light blue. That's the north end of the St. Croix Direct. So then that red line going for the northern half of Washington County has not been completed. And then Craig and Chisago are in the process of completing the St. Croix Direct through Chisago County. But then when we get up to Pine, we have that next section of St. Croix Direct that hasn't been completed yet. So with those 2 sub-watershed analysis completed, that would complete the entire direct drainage area to the St. Croix.
Okay, super, thanks.
Angie, this is John Hansen.
Yeah.
The figure isn't consistent with the list, because the list talks about Afton and Bayport, and both of those they're south of the St. Croix River, so they're not, or south of Stillwater.
That list is for the street sweeping analyses.
Okay, thank you.
Yep. So this map is showing the locations of where the group is recommending targeted analyses be conducted. And what I wanted to point out first is that everywhere, like here, that is already colored a gray blue or a light blue, that's a place where sub-watershed analysis has already been conducted and is complete. And the areas where there is, a red line or red circle, these are the next ones that the group is proposing to do. And then, like John Hansen just noted, right below it is the list of communities where the group would like to develop targeted street sweeping analyses as well. So the street sweeping analyses would be separate from the sub-watershed analyses. The sub-watershed analyses might recommend street sweeping as a practice, but are probably going to be more likely looking at where, which catchments are delivering the most nutrient load and where there's opportunity for practices to reduce that. Anybody from that group, feel free to jump in and correct me. Awesome. Okay, so then I will go back to sharing. How do I get back to that table I was sharing before? Okay, I'm back up in here. Then the last thing is administration. And there was no subcommittee to talk about this. The planning committee talked about this and wondered, everybody felt like this number is a little high, but also felt like it would be nice to keep it that way as a buffer contingency in case any of the other categories go over what our estimated costs are. And this would include not just things like being the fiscal agent and contract coordination, but also, you know, program and work plan coordination, grant and progress reporting, convening the subcommittee and the policy committee, updating the website, all those other things as well.
Angie, and I would note too, one of the other pieces that we talked about with that administration piece is in the first 2 years, there may be quite a bit of document development for all of these processes and reporting that we've been discussing. And so it could be more expensive the first 2 years just to get that foundation of organizational documents completed.
Yeah. So then the last thing I want to point out before I close this table is the discrepancy between what these add up to currently, which is 1,300,000, and what is coming through watershed-based implementation funds, which is 1,200,000. It's actually only about a $50,000 difference, but that is one thing to discuss as a group, is which category to remove that $50,000 from, or to pull in funding from something other than watershed-based implementation funds for.
Craig, I think, has a proposal.
Craig.
It's Jay. This is Craig up at Chisago. So a couple things. Angie, can you bring that spreadsheet back up, please?
Why,
And
yes, I can.
go back to the ag, urban, the education, project development, project stuff. Well, Dan, Fabian, and I spoke yesterday morning, and I did send out an email to the participants of the planning team on our meeting from Tuesday. One thing we didn't discuss in here is we discussed having some technical assistance options available, some technical assistance funding. And so I spoke to Dan yesterday. Technical assistance does need to be a separate category, a separate activity. So we will need to add in technical assistance if that's what the group wants. And we need to come up with protocols, how we're going to kind of fair and equitable distribute that money, how that money is going to be going out to different partners if they need the technical assistance dollars, whether it's for, you know, mainly for design work to implement those projects. So my recommendation is we have one activity for structural BMPs for agriculture, one activity for structural BMPs urban. We have one activity for non-structural, which would be combine both ag and urban. That way we allow some flexibility as far as moving money around if we need to for street sweeping, cover crops, general soil health practices. We do need to add a category for technical assistance in this plan, allocate a certain amount of money, probably from our structural BMP programs, and do that. And then my way to reduce the budget by the 50,000 would be, it's difficult, really difficult to have a half-time position working. And so my recommendation would be to remove Mary Jo, or the conservation watershed planner, from this budget, which would cut the budget by 50,000, that very first line item. I think it's line 4, cut that for 50,000 out of that one and make that $200,000 line item. Jay and I talked, and there'd be potential there where we would be willing to have different contracts with partners, and such as the Washington Conservation District, to share some staff time. And Jay and I, our offices already share staff time. And that way, if a certain office wanted or needed some of that assistance, we could do that. But that'd be my recommendation: be remove Mary Jo, or that $50,000, combine non-structural for ag and urban, and then make a separate category for technical assistance. And that would balance out our budget basically. Thank you.
As Craig said,
I do that. Yep, that would bring us. Now you see we're pretty much.
Yep.
Exactly there.
Thanks, Angie, and thank you, Craig. As Craig mentioned, we were able to talk about this, and my main concern about zeroing out that budget item for the conservation planner was, you know, making sure that we continued to have Mary Jo available to work on a basin scale. And if we still have the ability to work directly with Chisago to provide funding to have her do some conservation plans for us to support our ongoing activities, and that addresses that concern for Washington.
Okay, so we would be talking about adding a new row here to have technical assistance. Correct, Craig? That's what you were just saying.
Correct, Angie. I think our budget currently is roughly 50% is for structural projects between ag, urban, and non-structural. Excuse me, for project implementation between ag and urban, non-structural, and both the structurals, I think is around 600,000 if I remember correctly. We need to determine if we're going to allocate a certain percentage of that for technical assistance. That's something the group needs to decide how much they want to put towards technical assistance. And then we need to determine at some point before the work plan can be written, the protocol that we're going to use to allocate those funds to a partner if they need those funds.
Okay.
Dan, do you want to provide any more insight on that, how we should look at providing that protocol or developing that protocol?
I guess I don't have anything right off the top of my head. We might have mentioned some, excuse me, in our discussions, but I can't remember what that was. The other question I had is, where do your match funds figure into this?
We have match funds located. It's all on cost share dollars. So most of it's federal and or local partner match. So the match is 10%. So 125. We felt that wouldn't be an issue at all.
125 there. We've got 50 here. 4,000.
Okay, so
yeah.
For the cost share, then you're not going to fund 90% of the project. You're probably going to still only fund maybe like 75 or something, and then you'll get match or landowner dollars for the rest. Is that what you mean?
Correct. It'd be a combination of landowner, local dollars, and our federal dollars.
All right. Yeah. Super. So the technical services dollars. I mean, are you thinking? I think we talked some about like, is it kind of the shared services? And I think either you or Craig or Jay touched on that you have those services available to the other partners and that too. I mean, is that kind of what you're thinking of?
I guess I'm going to defer a little bit to Jamie and Tiffany, if you don't mind. I know there was some discussion during our planning team meeting the other day. What was your thought process on the technical assistance dollars? What would you like to see those for? So we have those in here and available for those that want to utilize them. And do you have any suggestions on how we fairly divide those up when needed?
I don't know if I'm just going to talk out loud, but if we set aside a certain percentage and when we know who's going to do the project, then we just work together to figure out who actually needs the money for technical assistance, because or split it amongst the people that are doing the projects based on percentage of funds that are going to them.
I mean, that would be part of the conversation on picking which projects are going to be funded.
Right.
I'll note too that Jamie did post in the chat that he had to step out. So if it's silent, it's probably because he's managing kids or something.
Dan, my question for you is, when the work plan is being written and reviewed by Bowser here, hopefully in late February, early March, are we going to need that type of information spelled out, or is technical assistance as an activity description specific enough, and we will as a group determine that before any technical assistance dollars are spent?
I guess it'd be nice if you knew that or had an idea. It wouldn't necessarily have to be spelled out in the work plan, I don't think. Maybe we can come up with something a little bit more generic if we feel we need it.
Thank you.
In the work plan. You know, the other thought I had, and this is more towards like Mary Jo and that, but the SWCDs all have capacity dollars. And that type of position, maybe that can be like a shared services where somebody doesn't need them all 100%, but I mean, that would be another way of funding some of those additional technical services.
Yeah, thanks for mentioning that, Dan. That's already part of the conversation.
Okay, thanks.
So For those of you in the group who would be wanting to tap into funding to support TA for existing staff for project development, like how much money are we talking about? And are we pulling that some from the ag BMP structural and some from the urban BMP structural? Are those the two categories it would be coming out of?
Well, Angie, I would prefer it wasn't project development. I think we have a lot of funds, which I strongly support going to education, through project development already. I guess I'll state that in other line items. And so
So what would you call this funding then? It's TA, just
It's
TA?
design. It's project design.
Project design, okay. Sorry, that was just a linguistics problem on my side that I didn't know what the right term was that you're using for it.
Yeah, I mean, it's the engineering and other technical design that I would consider part of implementation.
I think if you want to really look at how can we come percentage, historically, the Soil and Water Conservation District state cost share funds allowed you to utilize up to 20% for technical assistance. And I mean, so if we say, okay, and again, that's going to take away from
talking
project
about
goals.
Take 20% of 175 plus 20% of 225.
That's just a number I'm throwing out. We have stuff in there for non-structural also. And we have $600,000, I believe, for project implementation. And I guess I'm going to reach back to the partners that were requesting this. I want to kind of know what's a fair and equal amount that we can spend during this biennium for these projects, or how much is really needed to get the projects on the ground.
I'm just running the calculations just so we have real numbers to talk about.
Hey, this is Mike with Carnegie Marine St. Croix Watershed District. Just speaking from our watershed perspective, we were really just looking at implementation dollars, and so I would like as a swag, I would just suggest 10% would be something that I would be comfortable with for a design fund, and then we'll see who needs it at the time of application and see in this first round if that's sufficient.
So Mike, when you said swag, does that mean surface water assessment grant?
Scientific wild ass guess, Jay.
Oh, thank you.
I'm glad you asked, Jay. I was like, oh, now what does this acronym mean now?
Well, and I do want to make sure the group realizes, I mean, the grant, we can always move around 10% without board conservationist approval, a total of 10%. And anything over that, we can always do that with board conservationist approval. And Dan's been very good to work with over the years on making adjustments as needed. So I think if we put in a number in here that we're comfortable with, if we don't need it, we can always move it into more project dollars, or if we end up finding out we need more, we could request a change and move some funding if needed.
So Craig and Jay, this is Matt. So I have a question. Let's just categorize this as kind of three efforts. One is the assessment, which identifies projects. 2 would be a feasibility study. And then 3 would be, 30, 60, 90 design. Where does the feasibility study fall in there? Is that inside or outside of technical assessments?
I think at this point, that would probably fall under the prioritization category.
I feel the same way.
But we haven't specifically had that question, Matt, had that conversation, Matt.
So,
Matt, where do you think it should be? And do we need to have dedicated funding for feasibility assessments?
Well, I think feasibility is outside of design.
Right.
And I think your technical assistance should really be, I guess I think it should be limited to just design.
I agree.
I agree. Angie, just remember the way you have cell U6 right now, it will not add up for you at the bottom.
Yeah, no, I was mostly just doing that so visually people I wanted to kind of check in. So what we're talking about doing would be taking 17,500 out of ag BMPs and 22,500 out of urban BMPs. So this line item would just become a $40,000 line item and the other two would be reduced. Is that what we are suggesting? I just kind of wanted to check in before I started making the actual changes in numbers.
Thank you. Emily provided some text about how E-Link defines technical engineering assistance. So you want to read the chat on that?
Dan, Fabian, I have a question for you on engineering. Can we use watershed-based implementation funds to consult with a private engineering firm?
Yes, you can't use local capacity dollars for doing that.
Correct, but we can use
So
WBIF funds?
Yeah, yep.
Thank you.
Okay.
Angie, while you're doing that, I would like to prompt any
Okay, I did that
feedback
right.
from our. I'm sorry, I would like to prompt feedback from our agency reps who haven't been actively participating in the subcommittee process. If they have any questions or suggestions for the implementation table.
I'm going to stop the share just so people can see each other while we're talking. Or well, I guess nobody can see anybody but me. Hey, I didn't realize that. Me and Emily. There we are. Yes, this is new to the agency people since they weren't involved in the steering committee or subcommittee conversations yet. Does this feel like it represents the kind of work we talked about doing as a group back during the planning process?
How about a show of thumbs up if you think you like it?
Jen's nodding with a thumb up.
John, what are your thoughts? Jen,
Yeah, I mean,
couple thumbs up from Jen. Caleb, Derek, awesome.
Yeah, I mean, it's based on the priorities, the local priorities, so I think that it represents it. I guess my hope would be that to see, like some groundwater focused activities in the future.
That's a good point, John. I think when we start ranking projects or doing comparison to different projects, we do have groundwater as one of the criteria in the ranking form. We do have multiple benefits as something that will be considered. So especially too, if we start moving forward with a lot of these non-structural nutrient management practices, they're going to have a significant benefit to groundwater.
Thanks.
Yeah, the one thing that I will say is that I know that we're doing these check-ins annually, or I'm not sure actually what the interval is, but just make sure that if you do feel the need to contact us for additional resources, like we are here to help support you guys. And so I want to just make sure that I'm reconveying that again, that our support is with you, and this looks really good from as long as it's representing your local priorities. I mean, that's the intent of the plan.
Yeah, if anybody can come up with a source of reliable funding for diagnostic monitoring.
I'll take that back and see what I can do.
Okay, so I think we have discussed 3 of the 4 questions that we needed to get done during this meeting. We have found a way to eliminate $50,000. We have talked about lumping the non-structural and creating a separate line item for staff time for project design. And then that last question, we've not yet assigned lead entities for most of the activities. So is that a topic that people would like to discuss now, or is there another topic you think we need to talk about before that? It's so funny because all I can see is muted black squares. So I'm like, I have no idea if you all are smiling or frowning or anything.
Angie, in the group, have we settled on a TA amount?
That's a good question. Okay, let me reshare. So what I did with the numbers, I took Mike Eisensee's recommendation of a 10%. So I took 10% out of the ag BMP category and 10% out of the urban BMP category, and I stuck those both in this new category of TA, which is now a $40,000 line item. And our number at the bottom is still the same, so we're still good.
What is $40,000 going to buy us? I guess it's a question. Do we need that answer, Dan? I mean, do we need to put deliverables with that? Because it's just, I mean, that's not a lot of money if we're going to look at doing some engineering work and design work. And so I just went to the group what the plan is. If that works for everybody.
I think, Craig, for me, that's design funds to support areas where they don't have other sources of design funds. So I think that's an important piece of funding to support areas more in the northern portion of the basin.
Well, that's my concern. I just don't want all of us running to try to grab this $40,000 in week one. And I mean, we need to, as a group, come up with protocols for this.
Yes, I agree. I think that this should only be used in those cases where other design funds aren't available.
Thank you.
Okay. I'm gonna stop the share again. If Laura or Jen were here, they might ask for a fist to 5. I can't see any of you all, but if you were gonna do a fist to 5, how are you feeling about this? No, Jay, you won't let me do a fist to 5.
I don't like fist to 5.
You were like, thank goodness Laura and Jen are gone. No more
speak up. Especially in a remote setting, the Harnack approach of if you don't agree, speak up and say why, to me is
okay.
Provides a lot more clarity on the process. So
okay. Well, I'm going to take a significant pause then, so any of the quieter members in the group can feel free to speak up at this time. If you've been silently sitting in thinking thoughts, share them now.
Well, I'll ask a question. That last bit on the 40,000 for technical assistance, Jay mentioned he envisioned it for areas farther north where there are not funds for technical assistance. Should that be explicitly stated then, so that doesn't kind of get lost?
I think so. I mean, right now I just put a little note in the table that says that. I don't know what the exact. Okay. Yeah, I did write that sentence, so I don't know what the language is that would need to be written to make it sound more official.
John Hanson.
As long as it's noted, that's cool.
I have a follow-up question on that. I guess it's directed towards Tiffany. What do you have available for, I guess, technical assistance design? And is that something we would be interested in?
We don't have any projects identified in the current work plan right now. So
got it.
We'll be part of a swap potentially in this work plan, but we don't really need anything. Thanks for asking.
Yep.
John Hanson, you were trying to ask a question a moment ago.
Well, I guess maybe I missed it, and maybe this has been discussed in previous meetings, but it's a little bit, I don't know if it's necessarily fair to say that the money goes to places that don't already have the money because they kind of choose not to have the money in those other places.
I would say that in a lot of the portions of this watershed, there's a lot less local funding capacity, and that amount of funding could be very, very useful for getting important practices in, Pine County, for example. I don't want to pick on Pine, but I want to support Pine.
I tried to just choose to have more money, but it didn't work.
Okay. So would we like to move forward into the question of assigning lead entities for activities? I think we need to do that. And then I would like to touch base on what exactly it is that we need to bring to the policy committee on the 25th so that I can put together the agenda and get that out to them.
Quick question for you. Is that something that we need to have the steering committee do? Or if we can have folks who are, yeah, let's just.
No, we can leave that to the end of the meeting and then maybe almost everybody can hop off except for the planning team, maybe just to give me input on the agenda. So let's do lead entities. Let's do that conversation. Does anybody need to take a 30-second break? Because I do.
Well, then we all need to take a 30-second break, Angie.
Okay. So do what you want to for 30 seconds and I'll be right back. Boom, I'm back. And now I have no way of knowing if other people are still gone for another 30 seconds or if they're back also. Hey. I love how John Hansen's like, I'm here. Okay, let me re-share this table that we just keep looking at. And talk a little bit about who is going to do things. Who would be the lead entity for these various categories? About the only one that we assigned currently was the education program that we assigned Washington Conservation District to be the lead entity. Since Washington Conservation District is already hosting the MREP program, we thought it made sense to keep the new education person, as part of that. So I think that is the only one, and everything else is just kind of open right now. We had also compelled Craig Mell to continue being the fiscal agent and contract manager for the overall project.
Angie, I'll start out. I guess can we go back up to the first one? I think it's line 4. I would suggest at least, in my opinion, I think that what WCD should also be the lead on this one. I think this one will go hand in hand with the education component. It doesn't mean necessarily that person is housed there, but I do think a strong joint effort from both this category and the education would need to be used together. So my suggestion would be WCD on this one.
Okay.
Jay, is that okay with you? I mean, I know we've talked about kind of sharing. I'm fine with sharing this one, but I think I'd like to see it overseen in overseen by one agency.
I just wanted to say, Craig, though, that this this position's going to be a new position, and we're going to be relying on the agricultural expertise from all the partners in the basin. And as Craig mentioned, this person wouldn't necessarily be physically located all the time in Washington, and I would much prefer this position to have office space, in southern and northern portion of the watershed. So like at Chisago, SWCD in Washington, for example.
We definitely can do that. I would share those comments with you.
Okay, is that a good way to capture that idea, Jay? Staff will work basin-wide and may have more than one office space, so they might have one office located in the north and one in the south? All right. Yes.
I think that the staff will work basin-wide, and yeah, that works fine. That works fine.
Is there a reason for the BMP programs? I mean, outside of the fiscal agent being the lead on the BMP programs, I mean, I envision this as, we haven't spoken about this, but I mean, this is approving contracts, issuing payments, those types of things, isn't it?
I think the fiscal would make sense to be the point for all the cost share and pass through.
That's my recommendation also.
So I guess I would assume, however, that whoever is actually, if it's something that's happening for Rock Lake's in Pine County, right? So it'd be the money's passing through you, but it's staff with Rock Lake that's actually overseeing that specific project, correct?
How I envision is Pine County or SWC would come to us for the project. We still need to determine how it's going to be approved, but then we would have the contract with that LGU for the payment, and then we would reimburse them.
Okay.
Or whether it's an advance payment or reimbursement, whatever, I'm open to whatever, as long as Bowser approves it. But yeah, to me, whoever the fiscal agent is, to me, makes the most sense to be the lead agency for the cost share programs. And feel free to speak up if others disagree or want to do something different.
Okay, did I capture that appropriately here? And this would be the same for also all of the BMP categories, correct? So it would also be the same for the.
Not technical, that one.
Hmm?
Not the technical assistance one.
No, not that. Don't do that. Okay, taking that away.
Well, we need to discuss that before we move on with that one.
Okay.
It does make sense for the fiscal agent to be the host for all of the implementation funds. It doesn't mean they're deciding where it's going, because that's going to be decided upon by the group and the policy committee. But just as the point, because they're the ones who are going to be responsible to make sure that the funds go from Bowser to the local partner who's implementing it on the ground. And then Emily has volunteered to do all the grant reporting to keep Craig honest.
Thank you, Emily.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it makes sense, like the TA is going to be part of a project. And so you're probably going to have one subcontract with Pine County that covers both the cost share funds and the TA assistance, wouldn't you? If you're using that as an example.
Yes.
Okay. All right, so let's see. Then we hit the wetland restorations. Is there anybody who has, it seems like is the logical lead entity for this one? And I wasn't on the wetland subcommittee, so maybe somebody from that group might want to suggest.
Honestly, I think unless we have a really good reason to go otherwise, that the fiscal host would be the lead.
Well, let's just put it there for now. We can come back and review these. Let's go through these all and then come back and review them, see what makes sense.
Okay. It looks, Jay, could you check and see who just posted in the chat?
Yeah, that was Susanna. Thank you. We are on top of chat here. Chisago County is supportive of the work plan and budget, willing for Chisago to be lead agency or share lead for internal loading of phosphorus. There you go. Let's put them down.
Boom.
Unless someone else wants that role.
Chisago County in the house. Let's see, that was part of education, so we don't have to talk about that.
Thank you, Susanna.
Targeting analyses.
I would encourage Washington Conservation District, who's overseeing that program at the metro basis already, but that's just a recommendation because of that reason.
I have a question. So the targeting analyses will be kind of like SWAs and things like that. And then the project ranking, when we have some projects in mind and we want to go through Appendix C of the plan, where is that in this?
That's under administrative tasks, actually.
Okay.
Yeah, that's a good question. And just to clarify, when Craig was referring to what we're doing at the Metro, he's referring to the 11 county Metro Conservation Districts have conducted dozens of SWAs over the past, gosh, since 2012 or something like that. And the responsibility of the host is to just kind of oversee to make sure that the SWAs meet the minimum criteria, and then just kind of coordinate with the fiscal agent for funding. So the funding would still be going from fiscal directly to whoever is doing the implementation of the SWA. And Dan just clarified, Craig, you cannot make advanced payments to sub-grantees. So they're reimbursements. So I actually, for the SWA host, we can do that, but I would rely heavily on the rest of this group because there's a lot of expertise here, especially with some of the other prioritization efforts like the street sweeping prioritization and other things like that. There are others who have more expertise in those specific types of prioritization efforts.
Okay. The administration, when the planning team met a couple of days ago, kind of put some loose recommendations for who could do various components of this. And Chisago, looking at Chisago SWCD, continuing to be the fiscal agent and contract coordinator. A combination of me and perhaps Jessica Lindmeyer continuing to be the website people, since we have been for the past 2 years. Me continuing to convene the policy committee and subcommittee. Emily doing the grant and progress reporting. And then potentially, see how the group feels about this, potentially the new ag person being the program and work plan coordinator, since so much of the work we're going to be doing is related to outreach to agricultural landowners.
Can we expand on that discussion a little bit? I think it'd be good for everybody just to kind of, what do we envision with that program work plan coordination work? How much a percentage of time and everything? Because that would have an impact on the budget that on line 4.
Yeah. You know, right now, what we have in the text is approximately 80% of this position's time will be to directly work with agriculture producers to identify economical farming practices with water quality benefits and make them a routine part of farm operations. And the target is to interact with operators of more than 3,000 acres, and 20% of the position to support implementation of BMPs. You know, there's all sorts of things that we have talked about, convening farmer-led councils, like what they've done in Wisconsin, other kinds of outreach stuff. But yeah, that's a good question, Craig. How many hours?
Yeah, Craig. So I was thinking that this person would be kind of coordinating the on-the-ground activities with Emily for doing the reporting activities, because someone's going to need to be able to kind of track everything that's happening, you know, kind of creating some sort of centralized mapping of where everything's going, and then working with Emily on the reporting process. So that the role is going to evolve depending on the individual doing the work, obviously, and the responsibilities that others on the team can take on. But that's kind of what I'm seeing, is that this person would just be the one full-time person who's really making all the connections between, or helping make all the connections between all the partners.
Thank you.
Okay, well.
I have a question.
Yeah.
Before we move on, down in the admin section, Jay had mentioned that the project ranking is under that. Do we want to, I don't know if it really says it very explicitly.
It doesn't. That would be part of the subcommittee process that Angie would be helping coordinate, but that's a good point. We could clarify that that's part of that subcommittee process.
And then the kind of the assumption there is, you know, if you're on the steering committee, then you're part of that. We don't have to say who's going to be all involved in this. It's your committee members.
And when we're saying that I am coordinating the subcommittee process, not necessarily that I'm involved in the subcommittees making any of this project ranking decision, just that I'm seeing to it that the subcommittees are meeting, correct?
Correct. I think in a lot of cases, you would not necessarily even be attending some of these subcommittee meetings.
Good. All right. Yes. I just wanted to make sure that I was not inadvertently agreeing to something that I didn't want to.
And I suspect in some cases that coordination responsibility will actually be taken up by some of the subcommittee members.
Yeah. It's basically just being somebody to kind of nag and say, hey, have you met yet?
And the prioritization subcommittee, for example, is just going to be, you know, a group of folks who are really into that stuff, and that's probably going to be self-directed.
Okay, maybe do we want to clarify that this is these well, I don't know, maybe just the word subcommittee is the work plan activity subcommittees and not the steering committee versus the advisory committee. These are two different groups of people we're talking about. Work plan activity subcommittees.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. How are people feeling? Does this feel like we have those of you who know what we need to have for the planning? I'm not planning, the policy committee. Is this it? Do we have the information that we need to bring to them on the 25th?
I had one more minor thing.
Yeah.
Just to get our budget total to align with WBIF available. Do we just want to make the only non-even number is that wetland restoration implementation?
Yeah.
I want to call that 39,631.
I would support that, Emily. I saw that too. I thought the same thing.
Okay, good. Yeah, that was offending my eyes also when I was looking at those two being different. Why did that not change? Oh, there we go. Now it changed. Yeah, I was like, ooh. Okay. Tiffany, I know you're pretty familiar with like you know, what we said that we would bring to the policy committee. Is this it? This is what we need to bring to the policy committee? We don't need any other additional information for them?
Are we gonna put in, I see some like missing milestones and measurable outputs to put, just fill those all in? And then I think we had everything that is supposed to be in that annual plan.
Yeah, I
Right.
guess for the ag outreach, for the ag outreach, would you say that the milestones and measurable outputs are the same as the ag BMPs? Or is it something more like in here where we said the milestone is that we're hiring a staff person?
Dan Fabian, what will you expect and accept?
Cool.
See here.
I don't know. But Dan Fabian, you still there? Yeah, I mean, it seems to me like the milestones and the measurable.
Okay, now can you hear me?
Okay, yeah, sorry, were you talking? So the question, Dan, in terms of measurable outputs and milestones for the ag outreach person, are we just mirroring what the measurable outputs and milestones are below in the ag categories, or is it something different? Are we saying our milestone is that we hire a person?
Oh, I see what you're asking. I guess it's that you hire a person by when, but then, so that's like your 2021 task, right? Milestone, you hire a person.
Mhm.
And then, I mean, look at your, your targeted interaction with 3,000 operators of 3,000 acres. Is that one operator? I thought it was a total of 3,000 acres. Is that what the goal
Yeah.
is, or?
Yeah, a total of 3,000
target?
acres. Yeah, this was a question.
So
by-
anyways, look back to what your measurable outputs, what your goal are going to be, and what do you have to do to get to that, and what milestones do you have to complete, so by the end of this grant you've accomplished what you said you're going to do. I'm having issues with my audio too.
Okay.
Ed.
Well, I mean, so under here, we said that we have a milestone of trying to get 2,000 acres of non-structural. So, you know, the measurable output for here could be to engage landowners with a total of 2,000 acres. I don't know the right way to say it, but something like that.
Yeah, I guess I'd also think about when you look back and evaluate that person that you're hiring is what do they need to be accomplishing?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I just want to note that we had a message from Karen saying she is supportive of this plan and she has to run.
Okay. Okay, was there any other blanks? I think all the other things are filled in actually. I don't know what to do about I mean, this is maybe not staying in a table format, but Emily, like you had those nice little tables in the Word doc, and I didn't know how to like translate that information into this table, but.
Yeah, I wanted to ask Dan, because I know for Comfort Lake Forest, like our past watershed-based funding, I think Dan, you had recommended that table so that each milestone is connected to a year. And so you've got the 2 years of your grant and then each work plan activity. And so what is your milestone for each year for each activity?
Let
But
me share that just so everybody knows what we're talking about.
Yeah, I'm only getting about every other word that you're saying.
Are the milestones as they're represented in the big Excel doc acceptable to Bowser, or do you want them in that table format that Comfort Lake Forest Lake has done in the past?
Didn't you summarize those in the, or did you just reference the milestone table? I can, for your work plan in that, when you make your grant requests, this is probably good enough. I'll have to look a little bit further into it for what's actually in the E-Link work plan. Having the table attached with more detail is going to be helpful. It would be just a question of, do you need to summarize it at all? And the only reason for doing that, what I have to know is when people go into E-Link and dig out data, they're not going to get the data that's in the attachments. So I'm not sure how big of a deal it is for this particular issue, milestones and that. So I'll get you an answer on that before you do your E-Link work plan.
Okay. There was a question from Derek for, I guess there's a couple questions that popped up here. Okay, Craig, did you already answer Derek's question? Is that what I'm seeing? Sorry, I'm trying to read through all these.
Yes, I did. I answered to the group.
Okay. All right. Wait, this would be a great opportunity for me to reshare our, wait for it. This would be a great opportunity for me to reshare our opening question on a scale of cat. How are you feeling about our work plan budget as we move off towards the policy committee meeting on January 25th? And what I'm hoping is that most people are feeling like this. Channeling Cat 5 today. Cat 5. Yep. Okay. Are there any other things that, oh my gosh, how do I stop this share? There we go. Are there any other things that we would like to discuss as a steering committee while we are all together before we end this meeting?
Angie, did you say that planning team members should stick around?
Yes, could you please? I just want some input on what needs to be brought forward to the policy committee for January 25th meeting. And I'm also realizing that with Monday being Martin Luther King Day, I should maybe try to get that out tomorrow instead of Monday like normal. Okay. So if you are not a planning team member, then goodbye. It was great seeing you. You can feel free to excuse yourself now.
Thank you all.
In a not
Hi,
rude
everybody.
way. Goodbye.
Stay safe, everybody.